Brethren, the presentation that I've taken from Solomon is entitled Life in Biblical Times, which is a brief study of ancient Palestine during this remarkable period in history. A glimpse at the society in biblical times. Who were these people who have had such a profound influence upon this incredible fraternity of ours? What sort of people were they? What kind of lives did they lead? A very abbreviated chronology covering only the relevant period may be a good starting point, which incidentally, brethren, covers a period of over 2,000 years. In 1950 BCE, Abraham leaves Ur for Canaan. In 1600, the Hebrews moved to Egypt. In 1570 to 1280 BCE, the Hebrews are enslaved in Egypt. A remarkable 290 years. In 1280 BCE, Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt. 1280 to 1240, the Hebrews wander in the wilderness for 40 years. In 1020 to 1000 BCE, Saul becomes king of the Hebrew tribes. 1000 to 961 is the reign of David, 961 to 922 the reign of King Solomon and the building of the temple. 925, Egypt invades Palestine. 722, Assyria conquers Israel. In 586 to 539 is the Babylonian captivity. In 332 BCE, conquest of Jerusalem by Alexander the Great. In 63 BCE is the Roman conquest of Jerusalem. 37 to 4 BCE, the reign of Herod the Great, and around 6 to 4 BCE is the birth of Jesus, and circa 27 to 30 CE is the period of Jesus' ministry, according to Christianity's chronology. Should you wish to make reference to this list, brethren, please do so by logging on to Solomon and seeing it in the presentation. As a matter of fact, changes in social life of Israel took place extremely slowly. Everyday life throughout the Old and New Testament periods, though these were many hundreds of years apart, changed very little, even when massive political upheavals took place. In consequence, an interesting comparison can be made between nomadic life in the days of Abraham and the life of the modern Bedouins. By observing the latter, we get an extremely accurate picture of the former. The common perception of Israel in Bible times as a quiet rural society in which people lived in naive simplicity is a very long way from the truth. There were, in fact, almost as many occupations and trades as there are today, albeit with a much lower technology. Thus, making their achievements all the more remarkable. Many of the jobs which we in this modern age would leave to specialist tradesmen, notwithstanding the DIY efforts that we make, was done by members of the family, particularly in poorer families. Consequently, the majority of homes were humble and of simple construction. Within towns and cities, lifestyles varied enormously. In Jerusalem and Caesarea, the affluent members of society boasted magnificent designer homes, constructed by some of the best architects of the day. It is interesting to note that according to the book of Acts chapter 19, trade guilds provided a point of reference for working men of all kinds, and included many religious leaders. It was normal practice for rabbis to follow a trade. For example, Jesus was a carpenter and Paul was a tent maker. Surprising as it may seem, it was not unusual for women to follow a trade or profession. Lydia was a businesswoman engaged in marketing wool dye. The subject of slavery is also worth a mention. Although it was common throughout the Middle East, it was not widespread in Israel. The Jews had a deep-seated revulsion for their slave-trading neighbours, no doubt born out of the time of the Exodus from Egypt. Trade was every bit as vital in Bible times as it is today, and commercial activities occupied as much time and attention then as now. There was a constant stream of trading ships passed between the ports dotted around the Great Sea, known to us as the Mediterranean. Following the Roman occupation, piracy was almost unknown. Similarly, those transporting goods overland enjoyed the security of the Roman occupying forces that kept caravan routes free from bandits. The black gold of those days was not crude oil but grain, much of which was exported around the Middle East from Egypt. Israel's importance commercially lay in its position as a crossing point for great international trading highways. The Via Maris, translated as the Way of the Sea, which connected Egypt and North Africa with the Persian Gulf. What was known as the King's Highway, which connected Syria with the city of Petra, the gateway to Arabia. A third, and certainly the longest trade route, connected with the Via Maris at Palmyra, north to Damascus, and then swung eastwards through Persia and India as far as the border between China and Russia. The range of commodities which were traded was extensive and could be seen and purchased in the markets of the Holy Land. Things such as grain, wine, olive oil, perfumes, spices, linen, cotton, silk, rugs, dyes, bitumen, glass, metals, potteries, and ceramics, timber, ivory, and fish. Huge shoals of sardines were caught, with the use of dragnet techniques operated by vast gangs of fishermen operating from the shore, and although perishable, fish were packed into salt barrels and exported from the Sea of Galilee to many parts of the eastern Mediterranean. A large selection of fruit and vegetables were also sold locally, but without the facility of refrigeration, there was no method of preservation to enable them to be exported. Transport over land was by wagon, drawn by mules or oxen. Obviously, for crossing tracts of desert, camels were used as pack animals. These remarkable creatures were capable of carrying 400 pounds plus a rider and easily covered 20 miles a day. They can survive for a fortnight without water. Israel has always been an agricultural-based society, although much of the soil was stony and shallow. Farmers lived in the villages and owned or rented land nearby. The entire family helped. Larger farmers employed casual labour, as we can see from the book of Matthew chapter 20. Most farmers produced livestock as well as crops, and most farms had their fair share of sheep and goats, as well as vines and olive trees. Vegetables were grown in large quantities: beans, peas, onions, garlic, cucumbers, lentils. Herbs all found their way to a place in the markets. There was also a profusion of fruits and nuts: grapes, melons, figs, dates, pomegranates, and almonds. Olives, too, were grown in vast quantities. The oil was used for lighting and cooking, as well as a healing balm and skin cleanser. Grain was extracted from harvested sheaves by threshing and winnowing. This was normally done at a threshing floor, where the farmer took piles with a wooden fork and tossed them in the air. The straw and chaff was blown away, reminding us perhaps of the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, according to the second book of Samuel. You will probably recall, brethren, from a previous presentation, that was the threshing floor that King David bought from Araunah the Jebusite at a very advantageous sum. Cloth was made from a variety of materials. Flax, wool, goat and camel hair were all woven into fabric. Cotton was imported from Egypt in its woven state, and silks were imported from China by Phoenician traders. Wool was commonly used, and the dyeing of wool was an important trade, most homes had a loom, so woolen garments were always readily available. Camel and goat hair were woven into coarse and heavy garments because they were water resistant and very warm. Tents were made of goat hair, and this is still the practice today among the Bedouin tribes. The most common metal in ancient Israel was copper. It was extracted from ore by smelting, and smiths hardened the metal by hammering it. Around 2000 BCE, the Israelites discovered that a mixture of copper and 4% of tin made for a far stronger metal than copper. They made bronze. It was produced in vast quantities by the artificers in metals. Curiously, the first metals known to man were probably gold and silver. Both are found in a pure state in the ground and really need no complicated processes to produce them. Gold was beaten thin in order to use it in sheets to cover timber, and we know that King Solomon used enormous amounts of gold when he built his temple. The Greeks, Etruscans, Philistines and Canaanites all produced very fine pottery, whereas, by comparison, the Israelites made pottery for use rather than ornament. The art of glassmaking was largely restricted to the Egyptians and Babylonians, although items of fine clear glass have been discovered at Qumran in Israel. It is all of Roman origin, and the quality, bearing in mind it's 2,000 years old, beggars belief. The use of leather from animal skins dates back from time immemorial. Besides being used for belts, shoes and bottles, it was also used for writing purposes. One of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Isaiah Scroll, dating back from around 150 BCE, was written on 17 leather sheets stitched together. The number of sicknesses mentioned in the Bible are leprosy, cholera, typhoid, beriberi or dropsy, blindness, deafness, crippling disease, epilepsy, and others. Medicines and poultices were prepared from herbs, honey, natural oils, even wine. It was the Greek Hippocrates who laid down the principles of medical ethics, which are still observed the world over and incorporated in the Hippocratic Oath. Finally, let's make reference to the academic background surrounding this remarkable period in history. Most of the population could neither read nor write, and basic arithmetic was based on a system of 60 and 10. 60 is divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15 and 30. Hence, a scribe asked to write 83 would write 60 plus 10 plus 10 plus 3. It is interesting to note that this old system gave rise to our modern usage, i.e. 60 seconds, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle, etc. Modern museums have examples of clay tablets with writings engraved by a three-cornered stick. It is, however, sad to discover that no single line of the original Bible writings on clay, parchment, or papyrus have survived. So there we have it, brethren, a glimpse into the life experienced in biblical times. Thank you for your very kind attention. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation.